Wow, it looks like we've got a bunch of people out there. I'm really excited. I don't know what all of the audience has been doing today, but it's going to pale in comparison with what's going to happen in the next hour. We are incredibly fortunate to have like an amazing, amazing panel. I'm going to go through them in a second. Rather, even better, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves in a second. But what we're going to talk about is literally the million-dollar question. It could even be the unicorn billion-dollar question. Are you pricing your SaaS model correctly? And a lot of people out there are building SaaS companies. A lot of our audience, I can see, are you a SaaS company? Are you putting this out there? And the question about pricing is central. If you're in the SaaS world, you've heard that statistic that everybody has said that the average startup spends just 6 hours on their pricing strategy. Not 6 hours a day, not 6 hours a week, but 6 hours period on their pricing strategy. And that's, the types of pricing, flat rate, usage-based, tiered, per user pricing. That strategy, is it penetration? Is it captive? Are you skimming? Is it psychological pricing? Are you using charm pricing, product bundle pricing? It takes 6 hours to list them all, so I don't have no idea how they can only spend 6 hours even thinking about it. But that's what the statistics tell us. And people don't take pricing strategy as important as it probably should be. So this is a great, great hour for you if you're in this space. I'm going to go around and just introduce by name the individuals and ask them to talk a little bit about who they are and their background. Let's start with Peter Zotto, General Manager at Profitwell. Peter, can you give us a little bit of background on yourself?
Yeah, no pressure to be the first off the bench, right? So Peter Zotto, GM and co-founder of a company called Profitwell. We're about a 70-person startup in Boston. We help subscription companies with all aspects of growth. We started out as a company called Price Intelligently, and we sort of built the what I would consider the early to mid-market stage price optimization components of go-to-market for SaaS, and we've added a couple components on top of that that just sort of rides right in the middle of subscription growth at large through understanding what metrics make sense for a business, what metrics don't make sense for business, how to conquer churn, et cetera, et cetera. But really excited to be here. Been doing this far too long, so hopefully I can drop some knowledge to the crew. And big shout out to the Startup Boston folks that have volunteered a ton of their time. Thank you all for putting this together.
Yeah, thank you so much, Peter. Let's go to Jimmy Orsillo, CFO and Chief Operating Officer over at Underscore Venture Capital. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and if you don't mind me just kind of putting this in right now, tell us a little bit about the scope and breadth of companies that you work with respect to understanding their pricing strategies.
Yeah, so James Orsillo, at Underscore VC. People call me Jimmy, so feel free to call me Jimmy as well. Underscore VC is a seed to Series A venture capital firm in Boston. Our focus is on B2B SaaS, or B2B technology companies, primarily in Boston. We have a Boston bias. And I would say because we're early stage, if there is only 6 hours, I would say that people focus on pricing. It's probably in the stage that we're investing in. It's something that's super critical to your go-to-market strategy. And we work with our companies a lot on product market fit, go-to-market motion, and pricing is a critical piece to that. And so I actually did a workshop last week with Profitwell with a few of our portfolio companies, including Sam, on pricing strategy. My background is as an operator. So I've been with Underscore VC for 2 years, but prior to that, I spent my time at public and private companies. I was a CFO at Maxwell Health, which was sold to Sun Life. And throughout my career, I've been dealing with pricing, whether it's enterprise SaaS or SMB, sort of mid-market price points. So I have a variety of experience in this pain point.
Excellent. Thank you so much. A great, great introduction. From the VC side, let's just switch to a founder and CEO over at Knox. Kendall, tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about how pricing is part of the core activities that you need for your startup and what effort you put into it.
Yeah, it's great to kind of meet everyone. I usually love the crowd and love the energy. So hopefully there's a time where people can hop in, ask questions. My name is Kendall Hope Tucker. I'm the founder and CEO of Knock. We were known as Polis until our really exciting rollout of our new name, which was March 13th. So it boded really good things for this entire country. But I started my company about 5 years ago, and we were focused on how do we build data and technology solutions for companies that do direct-to-consumer sales. And so predominantly we've been in the in-person sales space. Because of COVID, we've been focusing on the call center and direct mail space. And we've tried all different things in terms of pricing. Everything from trying freemium when we were really tiny to now really we have a SaaS model that seems to be working well. So I'm excited to share some insights into where we've been, where we might be going, and just really excited to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kendall. And last but certainly not least, Sam, would you like to introduce yourself as VP Strategy over at Khazana?
Hi, everyone. Honored to be on the panel with such distinguished colleagues. Also honored to share what little knowledge I have with everyone here in the startup world in Boston. I, like Molly, believe this is the best place in the Startup Boston team to start a company, and have spent the last 25 years working for companies all over the place. And the talent pool that's here in Boston is second to none, really, and certainly much nicer to work with than other places I've been at.
Without naming names.
Without naming names. And don't look on LinkedIn. So the role I play here at Khazana is twofold. I and purposefully have found myself spending the better part of the last 25 years as the first VP of sales at early stage startups to help them get their product market fit, their go-to-market strategy, their ideal customer profiles, and certainly pricing is one of the first things that we look at when we come into a company. And like Kendall, you have lots of different ideas, and so do other people, and you spend the better part of 6 hours on the first day talking about it. At least I try to force that, and then it's a continual conversation, over this. The company I'm at today, Khazana, is proud to be an _VC portfolio company as well. We offer the first end-to-end analytic data lake available on Amazon and Azure. So it is all the way from discovery and ingestion, all the way through data science and delivery, running any kind of analytics, kind of with the no headache that you get from a SaaS platform. So we've been lucky enough to have landed on a hot market where SaaS is a perfect solution for riding on the coattails of both the cloud and other SaaS vendors here. So excited to be here to talk about our journey.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Sam. I saved myself for last because I think I have the fifth most valuable amount of information to provide to you as the audience. My name is Molly Ramani. I'm CEO and founder at Horsepower Technologies. What we do is we make both an orthotic for horses, and now we're about to launch a very innovative wearable. Think of Fitbit meets Peloton for your horse, and monetization of that is using a SaaS infrastructure and a SaaS model. So lots to talk about here. I'm going to say two more things before we jump right in. Number one, all of you in the audience should have access to see how to put questions in. So we want to make this as interactive as a Zoom meeting can actually be. So please send in your questions. I'll try to get to as many of them as I possibly can. And the second thing I wanted to say is, I think it was Peter actually who put this out. I researched this before, but literally a 1% improvement in your pricing can be an order of magnitude, i.e. a 10-fold increase in profitability. So if you're sitting at your computers right now looking at this, 1% of your attention will get you 10% value. So you do the math on it and put 10% in and you'll be 100% more valuable.
Yeah, I would just add, I can't take full credit for that. I actually think we have conducted some of our own studies, but I think the original quote, which is pretty close to what you said, is a 1% improvement in pricing leads to an 11% improvement in profitability. I believe that I actually may have been like an age-old McKinsey study from many, many years ago. But I think the misnomer here is when people hear pricing, they automatically think the ones and zeros on a page, be it $10 a month, $12 a month, $100, whatever it is. Pricing comes in lots of shapes and sizes. It's everything from who you're selling to and making sure you have the right buyers. It's making sure that your packaging structure is right. If you're selling a monthly SaaS model, it's making sure that you're positioning it effectively to those right buyers and that they want to buy the value that you're talking about versus selling something to somebody that looks great to you, but isn't necessarily effective to that particular person. And then yes, the pricing on a pricing page. So all of these things contribute to more of sort of this monetization effect than just purely pricing on a page or a rate card.
Oh, so well said. Well, let's just carry on now that you've kicked on. So tell me how you look at value pricing and how you would tell how would you advise a founder, a VP of marketing, a VP of pricing on how to get to truly value pricing versus, business model pricing? How would you address that question with them?
I could certainly give you my thoughts. I'd actually be curious to hear what Kendall thinks, given she's at the end of this, because she's a founder CEO, so she's probably been through this as well. I think a couple points of clarity when we talk about value that often get lost in the shuffle. So for many of you in the audience today, my guess is a lot of you have some either sort of SaaS solution or subscription type solution. The reality is that when it comes to pricing, many of us assume that there's really one of three ways to go, and they forget the fourth way. And those three ways are they either look at their competitors and they price on what their competitors are doing. Often this is misguided because it's fair to assume that your competitors have no idea how to price their product. And you wouldn't have built your product or entered that market if you didn't think you were unique and disruptive. So don't do that. If you are a SaaS business, your margins are probably pretty good, or your expected margins are pretty good, depending on how big you are today, which means that you can't price on a cost plus model. So don't do that. And then the ever popular, just sort of throw something up against the wall and see what sticks. Don't necessarily do that. What you want to do is you want to focus on this concept of customer value. And if you deduce customer value into what sort of how we think about it on a fairly regular basis, and I'm willing to believe the rest of the panelists here do as well, the very clear definition is the value that I get out of a product as a consumer versus the amount of money I'm willing to pay for the product. And you all in the audience go through this every day, multiple times a day in your own world. You evaluate value, you evaluate value in your subconscious pretty often, right? And the example that I often give is when we walk into a coffee shop like a Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts or whatever, we have an idea of what the price range that we're willing to pay for a cup of coffee is. It might be anywhere from $2 to $4.50. If we walk into a Starbucks and they say, hey, look, an iced coffee this morning is $10 per the iced coffee, you're probably going to walk out because at $10, it's far more expensive than you're willing to pay for that particular product, regardless of the value. So you want to start to think about value in a spectrum, because the human brain thinks about value in a spectrum. We don't necessarily think about price points as independent components that drive to a number. We think about this coffee's worth to me no more than $10 and no less than $5, right? So we want to think about it on a spectrum. So that's how I would sort of define this first and foremost, and then start to think about the ways to get at that. But we have 45 minutes to go, and I don't want to get the secrets just yet. But I would pass that to Kendall and see what she thinks.
Yeah, Kendall.
Yeah.
Does that resonate? Does it not resonate? Is he crazy? Tell me what you think.
He's crazy. Why is he here? No, so I love what Peter said. And obviously that's the standard business school trope, right? Is you can do cost-based, competitive-based, or value-based pricing. I think to be truly forthcoming to this entire audience, I think we need to go one level above that. Because obviously ProfitWell, incredible company. I'm a super fan. They're going for blitz scaling, right? Like ProfitWell wants to be the biggest company in a new market that they're creating. So of course they're not thinking about cost-based pricing. All they're thinking about is how do I own this? How do I get the logos on my site? How do I get so many people and drive a network effect such that later on down the road, a common example, this isn't SaaS, but a common example is Uber. Right? Do you remember when Uber was paying you to ride in an Uber, and Uber was paying drivers and they were just burning money? I mean, they continue to burn money, but you get the idea. Amazon's another good example, right? Like these companies always said, we're just going to burn _VC's money. We're going to burn a VC's money until we own so much of the market that it's automatically recurring. We can deal with the CAC and we can get it down. And so I love that. I agree with everything that Peter said. I do think there are probably some people on this call who aren't building venture scale businesses. And I think that's great as well. Yeah. And so I've been learning a lot recently on Twitter about small and medium-sized businesses. If you build a business, if you don't raise venture capital, you get it to $10 million, like you yourself would own the entire thing, like you're very wealthy. And so if you want to build an SMB, and it can be SaaS, it's less common, you do want to think about cost-based pricing. You want to be thinking about profit from day one so that you can grow your business. So just, I would say that's my major caveat. We also were following the blitzscaling playbook. You can read Reid Hoffman's book about this. It's truly incredible. Yeah. But we were saying to ourselves, the CAC really doesn't matter early on. It's extremely difficult to measure early on, even though people will ask you about it. But you're saying, okay, I have some competitors in this space. There might be other competitors who are going to become very well funded entering my space. So how do I get so many clients excited about my software and build a value proposition where the more value they get out of the software, the more they're going to pay?
Oh, what an excellent answer. I want to come to Jimmy on this, but I'm good because I know we had a conversation about this a little bit earlier in the pre-conversation. I want him to chime in on it. But before I go to Jimmy, I want to go to Sam, also in a company. So I want you to we got Kendall's reaction to Peter's point. What is your reaction? Do you think there's more of a balance, or do you think that, Peter's got it right? It's like, figure it out, get the value place, or is Kendall right? You've got to figure out what's right for you and get a little bit more of that cost assumptions in there.
Yeah, I think they're both right. Peter's description at the beginning shows you, how complicated this can be right off the bat, how many options and variations of options there are, to do this. So you shouldn't take this lightly. And I think it also depends on the stage of where you are, right? Companies that I tend to work for are early stage. So there is mostly a product sometimes, and getting the pricing right to gain those first few customers is hand-to-hand combat, right? And then you see what customers are willing to keep paying you as opposed to what they're willing to pay you up front, and trying to get that up. I do think the value-based pricing is the one that I tend to gravitate towards, on top of that, especially early on, right? It's to feel out where the soft spots are of where the value is, especially like Peter and I think Kazina, where we're trying to define a category where there really isn't a relevant analog, in a competitive space. And maybe there's people that sound like it or want to be doing something similar. But no, I think, figuring out what the alternative is and what the cost of the alternative is to the problem that you're solving is a hard part. But presumably you started the company because you knew how hard that was and had experience around what those alternatives are, and what you and others were willing to pay when you were trying to solve those problems yourself. But I think both are right, and largely depends on where you are in your journey and maturity, as well as even what your first phase goals are, right? I want to own the market and get as many logos as I want, or I don't want to burn Jimmy's money because I have big plans in my next phase here. So
now that you brought Jimmy into the equation, and particularly his money, from a VC perspective, Jimmy, do you want to chime in on this, and maybe with a perspective with respect to, does it change over time? Did your strategies evolve when you're just getting off the mat? Your strategies change. I mean, the way Kendall said it was brilliant. Amazon's strategy day one isn't Amazon's pricing strategy now, nor Uber's, et cetera. You want to chime in a little bit about how you think of pricing and if it's stage related at all?
Yeah, so I'll take that in two parts. I have from both a venture perspective and just, having worked in startups and venture-backed startups and then advising a bunch now, I think there is a sequencing, right? So you have to have a great entrepreneur solving a really big pain point, right? And then you have to think about the product that solves that pain point, and you want to match up a great product with a really big market. And I think the early days of pricing it's a process of iteration. It's A/B testing, it's trying different things and understanding the exchange at which you can sell something. But I think that a lot of times people get so caught up in like, I can sell this, I have product market fit, that they don't think about the enduring quality of what the pricing mechanism communicates to the market and how it needs to change. So I think early on, you know, when you're establishing product market fit, you're doing something with pricing, right? But if you were to think of like some coefficient of correlation and how tight that fit is, it changes over time. So I don't think that it's like and I do believe that people talk about it in like a serial way where it's like, I have product market fit, this is my pricing strategy, blitz scaling. I think as we look at a lot of our startups, it's a constant evolution. So it's a process. It's a iterative process of learning and adapting to where your product is and where the market is, and kind of making sure that you're creating ongoing value for customers and you're rationalizing that value through your price.
That's excellent.
Did I answer your question? Or
I guess you answered the question directly, and that's perfect. I'm kind of more curious if you could give a little bit in the sense of best practices, though. I mean, yes, it's constantly evolving. Yes, it's a conversation with the customer. Absolutely right. But do you see some general trends at a startup at a seed level versus startup that has now 1 million in a monthly recurring revenue? Like, do you find any commonalities in your experience?
Yeah, I think probably before the 1 million in ARR level, or even like 100,000, 200,000 in ARR level, it's really just about the product and making sure that you've got a product that and you're nailing the product that fits your ideal customer profile and nailing it. So regardless of what you charge for it, in the final analysis, that's academic. It's the learning that comes from just nailing that product, nailing that pain point, adding value to customers. And then I think, ProfitWell preaches this a lot. It's really understanding that value equation and how customers perceive the value that they get. And as you're having these dialogues with your beta customers and you're nailing that product and you're refining it and you're really making sure that it's airtight against the pain point, then you have a sense of what to charge for it. Mm-hmm. And then you want to think of it as an iterative process, something that you're going to test out. You're going to build sales collateral around, marketing collateral. And then I think of it as, you kind of build the tooling. A lot of times it's the founder doing it, right? They're out in the market, they're hearing what's happening, they're iterating internally. And then when you're at about 1 million to, and I hate to use numbers like this, and this is so general, but 1 million to 2 million, you start to build the next level of tooling around demand generation and thinking about the close process, et cetera. And there are other steps at an A and a B, but I think a lot of that, the hard iteration, the cycling through, happens in that sort of like seed to Series A stage. Probably it's about 1 to 1.2-ish million, very generally speaking, but just that's my hunch. No, I'd be curious to hear what the rest of the panel thinks about that.
I'll let anyone chime in if you'd like to. Go ahead, Kendall.
Yeah, I'd be happy to jump in. So I agree with a lot of what Jimmy said. I think the only clarification, and this is probably what Jimmy meant, is he said it's all about the product. And I think product innovation is one path that's very standard and very exciting. But I think we also see business model innovation, which is very relevant to this conversation. And so if you want to throw it back in time for a bit, Netscape IPO'd really fast. They were the sexiest company on the market. And you had to pay for a browser. I was a child at the time, but I hear this. You had to pay for a browser. And so then Internet Explorer came along. They weren't better, right? The product was exactly the same, but it was free. And so you think of innovation as being something that's 10x better. I think that's Paul Graham who says it. I don't think Internet Explorer was 10x better than Netscape, but it was free. And so in terms of value to the consumer, which is what Jimmy kept saying, which is why I think I completely agree, value can actually be in innovative pricing models in the same way that value can be in innovative products. And so I think you have to look at all aspects of building your business, where sometimes you see founders who are completely product driven, and they're missing other levers that they could be really successful using.
Well, yeah, that's a really interesting point. I'm going to do one last question about this pricing model before I want to move on to a different topic. It comes in from one of our customers, really wants to understand, one of our panel attendees, right? I just want to get the exact question correctly here. So you've got some big customers that sometimes, in the B2B model, presumably, you've got big customers that have special terms versus medium-sized customers that don't get those same terms. How do you reconcile the cost? Usually costs about the same to support each of these, but the larger customer, fundamentally, you're making less margin on. How do you approach this problem, and how do you engage with them to figure out which is the right customer price per customer or even across the board? I was thinking Sam and Kendall would answer that, but it's open to everyone, actually. Let's go with Sam first, just to.
Yeah, I think it's an important conundrum, right? Is walking away from good money is always a hard thing to do. I think it you have to look at the special terms and what that's doing. Is it just commercial terms, which may be easier to live with? Is it product, engineering and other things that is more expensive and could derail your business and your business model and your direction, just because it's a bigger company and a bigger booking or revenue doesn't mean that it's the right business, especially if it derails everything you're trying to do. And I'll speak as the head of sales and in this regard, not that just the head of strategy, that walking away from business, especially at an early stage startup, is the hardest thing to do, but sometimes you have to do it, right? It's not an easy thing. I don't think you should lose sleep if it's accretive to your business, accretive to your, it's not diluting your or distracting your business model. A way to do that, to think of doing that. Just keep an eye on it, make sure that it's not going to be a recurring theme, because that might show that your pricing model is actually wrong, right? Might need to readjust that to have a different tier or a different pricing model for different kinds of customers.
I think this comes out, this is a value metric issue.
Yeah.
Molly, right? Like so what Sam said is correct. I think if you take a step back though, you got to look at what are the metrics or unit of measure that you're actually charging on, so you can differentiate between a big, medium, and large customer. And you can capture either a bigger budget from a large customer, but still something small budget. It's called small budget from a small customer, to also get them into the door from an acquisition perspective. And so they stay with their product for a long time, and you can sort of upgrade them over time. But value metrics, the way to think about value metrics, and again, this is something we all deal with on a daily basis. It's just the unit of measurement that a company charges you on. So for traditionally like Salesforce and CRM systems, they're often like per user based pricing, right? So the way that this works is small companies can use it because there's 1 or 2 users and they pay however much money a month. As that company grows, they add on more users and therefore they pay more money, right? So there's this nice, sometimes linear, sometimes exponential growth that happens within those value metrics. When you're thinking about this, by the way, don't use per user based pricing for your value metric if you're not a CRM system or some sort of like customer success chat problem solution. It's often misguided if you do that, right? Choose something else, whether it's API calls, storage, feature-based differentiation, or have like a flat fee that rises based on the amount of revenue that a company has for their product. But I would stay away from those other two.
I don't mean to interrupt. We just had a couple of notes come in that everyone could do their best to define the acronyms that they're using. Just we have some non-SaaS
absolutely
people or folks that are chiming in, and I'm sure they're super interested and excited, but we don't want to exclude them. So when you talk about APIs, like spell it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry about that. So yeah, the simple value metric is a per user pricing. I talked about Starbucks earlier. The value metric that Starbucks uses is actually the drinks or the food item that they give you. For us that, for people in here that pay for like ClassPass or Peloton, you're paying on a monthly basis on a per user basis. When I mentioned API is application programming interface is what the acronym stands for, I believe. And no, okay.
No, you're right. You're
I just
exactly right.
don't know.
Oh, okay. Yeah, API is a. I feel like this is now going to go totally off topic. That I probably should have mentioned API. You know what? Forget the API. It's a technical term that for the folks that know what it is, you certainly are aware. For folks that don't, it's probably not worth the conversation of going down that rabbit hole. But yeah. Somebody just said, can we define what possibly falls into the definition of SaaS? Yes, it is what's found on Teachable. So anything that's subscription based that you pay on a recurring basis, doesn't matter how much or how that product is being delivered to you, that is subscription. SaaS stands for software as a service. And so I would argue that like Teachable is not software, it's content as a service, but it falls under the general definition of subscription based software, as is Peloton, as is the gym membership or the gym memberships you had, or I don't know how many people are going to the gym right now, but all those things are subscription.
Sure. So I want to switch things up a little bit. We've talked a little bit about how you figure out what the right pricing is. Let's say you've gone through this exercise, you've been incredibly educated by this panel that we have here, and you figured out what the right price is. And you've spent 6 hours or 60 hours or 6 years figuring it out, but you've got it in there. The second question is, how do you communicate your pricing to your audience? Is it a type of pricing that you might want to just publish on your website for everyone to look at? Is it a negotiated pricing that you have with your key customers, which goes back to the earlier question where you might give most favored nation pricing to someone versus others? How do you approach pricing? And I want to be really good with the audience here, because the easy answer is, well, it depends on your business, right? And I get that, of course. But once you get down into your business, what are some of the best practices as a group here that we found in terms of pricing communication and how you engage with your customer in this conversation about pricing? Haven't heard too much from Jimmy lately, so I'm going to start with Jimmy.
Okay. Well, it does depend on your pricing model. And I would only say that, I think enterprise, so let's talk about like the size of a contract. So we talk about ACV or ARR. If you're selling something that's $100,000, it's not as amenable to just putting the price on a web page and having people, because they're not going to buy it that way. They're going to call a sales rep. It'll probably be heavily negotiated. It'll probably have some add-ons and services. That's usually the way we buy these, sort of 6-figure contracts. Now, if you're selling something, you can go back to Peloton. I was shopping for a Peloton the other day. It's communicated on their webpage, and I think the way that they communicated it really well is, and ProfitWell, again, kind of get another nod to you guys, is like, I thought about their pricing strategy the second I went on their page. It's like, who am I, right? So I need the family pack. I need 2 pairs of shoes. I actually really didn't care about the water bottles and the headphones and everything, but I could see how much it would cost for the family package. And immediately, the value to me, the understanding of what did I need, what fit right for me was communicated. I think, when you're dealing with, and those are products that, you can buy off a web page, or, it's a lower touch, smaller sales cycle product. I think communicating through your website is, something that you absolutely have to make sure you have dialed in so that a consumer, customer can instantly recognize what the value is to them at a certain price point.
Peter, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I 100% agree. I think I am of the mindset, I am vehemently against not publishing your pricing, meaning like you should be pretty transparent with it. People will certainly debate this internally with me quite often. And the quick reason for that, if I can keep it 30 seconds, is especially if you're just starting out, you're in somewhat of or you're trying to disrupt an industry, or you're somewhat trying to create a new market, that's awesome. And you have the opportunity to dictate to the market where you set value. And by the way, for anybody that is in the process of changing prices, go like 20% higher than you were initially going to go. You're all underpricing your products, I guarantee you. So when it comes to being transparent, what most people are trying to do when they're transparent is to have a conversation with somebody, meaning a sales rep gets on the phone with a prospect and that sales rep does some discovery and they figure out like they have more budget than they initially planned for. But the reality in today's environment, especially as you know, the consumerization of enterprise level software that we're all trying to build here, most of us as buyers spend a fair amount of time prior to talking to a sales rep researching a company. And if I'm looking at 5 companies that do relatively similar things and all of them except for one have pricing, the first place I'm going to go to have a conversation is the one that has pricing. It's
Right.
not worth my time to mess around with the other ones that want me to talk to a sales rep. So give yourself the opportunity to engage with people, put some parameters in place that like you can kick out bad leads relatively early. But if you're just starting out, it's worth every single conversation that you can have.
Sticking with Jimmy and Peter, just to follow up to both of you guys on this, does it matter if you're first to pricing, like you're first to market in your category, or does it matter if you're like 5th in your category coming? Like, would your advice change if your competitor has a higher price or a lower price relative to what you were targeting? Is it still communicating the pricing in the way that you suggest?
I don't
Jimmy, you're on
think,
mute.
oh, Jimmy's
I would say
speaking.
no. I think that you have to, my belief that pricing is a process, it's not a one-time event. So I think, getting out there, starting the motion is never bad. I mean, clearly there's going to be some reaction in the market and you'll have to adjust, but I wouldn't suggest kind of pricing defensively. I think if you're doing a really good job, you've got it dialed in. You know where customers are perceiving value from your product. You've contemplated that and you're starting somewhere and you're iterating. What I would say is you have to trap, the reactions of your customers, how value may change for them over time. And that's in a process. So whether it's a pricing committee or someone in your product management team who's just really laser focused on pricing, I think you just need to start somewhere, iterate. It's, scientific method, right? You have a hypothesis, you test it, and then you remediate anything that could be off course. So no, I wouldn't suggest pricing defensively.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I was going to give a different perspective.
Go ahead.
I was going to give a different perspective on what Peter said. So I think whether or not you post pricing and how soon you post pricing entirely depends on your end customer. And so Jimmy said that if it's direct to consumer, obviously you have to post pricing. Honestly, it's wasting your time to get on any calls with your customers. If you're selling to SMBs, if you're in the $300 to $500 a month range, again, like you have to post pricing. You don't have time to be on any phone calls about that. When it comes to enterprise, I think it does get more challenging. And enterprise customers do have time to get on phone calls, right? There's heads of procurement. We sell directly to VPs of sales and VPs of marketing, and they're used to that. And we also sell into very traditional industries. And so they're not nearly as price conscious as you would think, so much as they need every feature. They need an enterprise solution that's catered just to them. And quite often, especially early on, when we were trying to get logos, that included some amount of development work with them. And so setting a price was challenging. And so as Jimmy said, you have to be able to use data and test your pricing. And so using that data might be that you have a website on Optimizely or something else where the pricing is actually changing and you're seeing how that's affecting your pipeline and who's requesting demos or signing up. But in the enterprise space, sometimes that data, especially early on, is by getting on 10, 20, 30 sales calls a week and telling them very confidently different pricing. And so that's a little bit throwing stuff against the wall. I think you should have that range that Jimmy mentioned very early. Like you should know from the work you've done in product what the range should be. You should probably up it by 20%. I firmly agree with Peter that you are underpricing. But there has to be different ways to use data and test it. And then the enterprise space, sometimes that is early on, not posting it.
So one thing I'm going to do after this call is I'm going to go back to that whiteboard there. I'm going to raise all the numbers by 20 to 30% because I'm convinced by all of you. But let me go to Sam here because in your current role and in your previous roles, and maybe you can correct me if I'm mistaken, you've got a lot more enterprise engagement in terms of your SaaS engagements. How have you approached variation in pricing amongst your customer segment, and how have you done it? Have you done a little bit what Kendall is saying? Confidently said A, and then the next call confidently said not A.
That's a lot of math to keep straight in my head. But I do agree early on, it is one, knowing your business and the problem you're solving and making a set of hypotheses around what the value is to the customer. And then the only way to test that out truly is with a customer, right? Because to Peter's point, they're the ones that are paying for it. And if whatever you think your price should be, if no one's buying it, then your price is wrong, right? That's, and if you're not making any money, then your price is wrong. I do only sell, to enterprises. They don't have to be large enterprises, but the nature of the products that I've sold in my career tend to be data intensive. So you could be a small company in digital native with lots of data that comes with lots of hard technical challenges to solve and resource constraints, or you could be a big company with lots of data, same challenge, right? It doesn't have to be a large enterprise when people hear the word enterprise, but it is an enterprise sales process, right? And that's what we're selling. I got into the SaaS business and when I look at companies, to partner with, to join, I want to align with the easy button, right? And SaaS is the easy button. The problems we've all solved by creating these SaaS platforms, the alternative is lots of complexity and lots of pain and headaches and swearing and attrition and and that just sets everybody back, right? So I think if you're early on, it's hard to put a price up and on your website and have it change and have it change again and have it change again, because people may come to you just to see what you are and see the price there, and then they come back 2 months later and see, oh, it's a different price, and come back later, oh, it's a different model, right? And it really makes it harder on you in the early stage to keep having to do that. However, if you subscribe and believe in the model that SaaS is the easy button, having everything be an enterprise sales cycle, especially top of the funnel when you've got enough revenue and inbound and pipeline to go off of and to chase, having that pricing on the website eliminates a lot of friction, especially with unqualified leads, right?
Right.
As long as you can articulate what the value metric is on the website, and for lots of companies, including mine, that's a hard thing to figure out, right? Because they're going to see a number, they need to know what the alternative is in the context of what the number means to them, right? And be able to extrapolate whatever the pricing metric is, not per user if you're not a B2C. It could be amount of data, amount of compute, the time that you're on a system, whatever the case may be. But make sure that just because I say it's $1 an hour, I don't know what how long my process is going to take, right? So you have to be able to articulate that. So that leads to get to pricing on your website if you know your business well enough, right? Because it eliminates friction.
So I want to go to a question we got from the audience. Eric had a question about asking to all the panelists, can you discuss commodity pricing versus other categories of pricing? And I'm going to expand on that question a little bit. So assuming your product hopefully isn't a commodity, right? We're not in this world, in the SaaS world, to try to make a Me Too product, but perhaps, in the Netscape example that you gave before, the Internet Explorer or the Mozilla or whatever else was out there, examples, you end up getting into a commodity situation. But in addition to that commodity element, if you find yourself, how do you address pricing? But in addition to that, talk about freemium pricing and whether that's a model that you find makes sense for each of your businesses, Sam and Kendall, and whether you would give those kinds of advice to companies that are in a freemium model Peter and Jimmy. Let's go with Kendall first, just to shake things up.
Consider them shook. So the first question you asked about commodity pricing, I don't spend much time thinking about commodity pricing because I don't want to be running a company that's a commodity. And so if I think about the Netscape example, obviously Internet Explorer won. And so then the question is, why did Chrome win, or why is Chrome winning right now? And that was product innovation, like what Jimmy spoke about. So again, they took something that could have been commoditized and it wasn't. Like they weren't then able to price it. But there are examples. Right now, Superhuman is really hot. It's an email provider. It's a competitor with Google that is charging. And so they've had to build such a remarkable product that people are willing to part with $25 or $50 a month when Gmail is obviously free. So I'm probably not the best person to answer anything about commodities. But if you are sitting at a point where you think to yourself, I'm a commodity, my business is a commodity, you really have to think about the S curves. And there's so many times when businesses win something. Let's give Google Chrome or Google as an example. They win and then growth flattens out. The reason these companies are remarkable is because they're innovating so much internally that they're saying, what is the next product going to be? How are we going to win the market? And so Amazon, for example, they were selling books and then they were selling lots of products and then they created AWS. And AWS is obviously the big reason why they're making so much money. And so I would say we're still very much in our first phase of growth, where we're best in market. We are doing work to differentiate ourselves, selling enterprise deals. But hopefully if it ever gets to a point where it feels commoditized, we're innovating on other aspects of our business. And I forgot the second question, so I'll stop there.
Freemium, thoughts on freemium models?
Oh, so when we started, and I imagine this is a very common thing that has happened to many founders, we had 7 pilots. And the first 3 of those 7, we said, just use this platform for free. We want to see if it drives value. And these were horrendous relationships with these companies. Because as you can imagine, they were given something for free, which meant that they felt that it was valued at 0. Therefore, many of them never bothered to log in. They didn't care. And so the other half of the companies, we charged them nothing, something very low, like $100 a month. And those companies loved it. And they were great in terms of very early beta testers. We could ask them, what did you like? What didn't you? Because they were using it so often. And so we are very much high enterprise technology. We, at this point, don't really like signing deals that are less than 6 figures. And I think in our case, freemium doesn't make sense. Mm-hmm. That being said, I can think of freemium models that have been wildly successful. And so Slack is obviously the first one that comes to mind. And that's because they have a network effect where if I use it by myself, it's not a very good platform. And so if I use it and I convince a few friends to use it and we can do it for free, which is why the freemium aspect of it is great, we start using it and there's a natural point where you just want to pay. You don't want them deleting your messages anymore. You want to be able to share channels between different companies. And they've built out features that make it very compelling to have a paid model. It's still really affordable. So I don't know what that line is where freemium works or not, but I do feel that it's somewhere in the realm of it works really well for consumer. It works well for SMB. I think Slack is still figuring out the large enterprise security aspects of it. And my guess is Oracle is really never going to use their free model, right? A group like Oracle is going to make sure that they've paid and it's the perfect solution for them. And so maybe that's the nuance of the question.
Oh, no, excellent. Peter, you chimed in with a thought. Why don't you expand on that a little bit about acquisition versus pricing strategy? Tell us more about that. Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm a rookie over here. Freemium is not a monetization strategy. Freemium is not pricing. Freemium is purely acquisition. So use it wisely. It doesn't really matter. Like we think about and talk about freemium a lot. I'm a fairly large proponent of freemium, but it is something to be careful of because it can escape your grasp pretty quickly. as Kendall alluded to, with people essentially devaluing a product. And also, I will tell you this, it's a lot easier to get somebody to pay an increase of from $1 to $10 or $100 than it is to get somebody to pay from $0 to $1, right? The delta, although significantly smaller, is a lot harder to get over from a psychological perspective. But freemium is a great way to acquire customers. So a lot of the folks in the audience, I would guess, are relatively early in their life cycle. If what's important to you is to get users onto a platform, or for what's important to you is to make sure that you have a number of people using some element of the product, freemium is a great way to get them to do that. You can essentially feature gate the freemium components that if you want to use more, or if you want better components, or you want higher levels of support, which people tend to want to pay a lot of money for, they can do that, but you have to pay for it, right? And that's the differentiation between freemium and paid. But I think that like it's a great strategy to use when you have the parameters set in place, and don't just be freemium because it feels like it's the right thing to do. Do a little bit of research before I think you go live with it or you go to market with it. And I'll say this, Kendall sort of mentioned this a moment ago. We look again at pricing in a spectrum. There's essentially 4 questions that we ask to get people to figure out a number that they give us for what the willingness to pay is. It starts at what price point is so high for this particular product that regardless of the value that you get out of it, you cannot consider purchasing it. But we also ask the question on the bottom of that spectrum, and that this is really important, which is at what price point is my product so inexpensive, you're actually going to question the quality of my product. And this is, again, something that we do as consumers on a fairly regular basis, right? We were all taught as kids, you either get what you pay for, or if it's too good to be true, it probably is, right? So we've all used Facebook and Google, and it's always free, except they're using our data and they're selling it in ways that they're making money off of it. So if your product is too cheap, people are going to assume that it's not worth it, or that it's a startup and it can't compete with some of the bigger dogs out there. And so you want to be careful about going too low or using freemium too much.
No, excellent answer. So we're running out of time, and I want to get to 2 really important questions. This one came in. It's presumably targeted right at you, Jimmy. From a venture capital perspective, during diligence, what factors are you looking at for a company's pricing, and what are the biggest red flags that nix deals?
Good question. You know, I don't want to give a generic VC sort of answer, but you know, a lot of the diligence that we do is around backing incredible entrepreneurs and teams. Like that's the most important. You can't change that, right? So invariably, you know, that's a huge point of diligence, is just understanding the founder, why they're uniquely qualified. And then you have to look at the product and the business model, right? You have to understand if there's a match there. Can the founder really go after this problem with this model and this product? Within that problem set, there's very, very little room for error. And I would say, you know, the secret is VCs reject 99% of the deals they see, right? And of the 1%, you know, it's really when those things are harmonized and you as a venture capitalist can add value to that team, that product. You've got some insight. We have a community model. So we've got a community in Boston of entrepreneurs, operators that have expertise in things like pricing and things like go-to-market strategy, et cetera. Those are things you can change. So we've never nixed a deal based on a pricing strategy. I would say when I do due diligence, and I do a lot of the due diligence for deals, you know, especially financial models and thinking through how people are thinking about their market, it's not the pricing that will stick out per se, but it's the thought process. It's how well do you understand this market? But you know, whether you're freemium or whether you've got some sort of friction reducing way of getting people to sign up and try things, that's not really the make or break for us. It's really around the team, the product, and the market. And then we work together with our community and our team to kind of think through the strategies that optimize success.
Oh, awesome. Great answer. Okay, so now we're in lightning round. I want to ask a couple of questions to everybody. Sorry, that was my lightning because I don't have the ability to change the weather. I want to ask everyone, you have to answer this in like 15 seconds or less. I've got a couple of questions, and that's probably all the time. We'll get to 2. What is the one thing you wish you knew but didn't know at the time about your pricing model when you started your company that you know now. Sam, you're first.
That it's an ever-changing and a continuous process, right? Your first pricing model will not be your last pricing model. Don't be too proud to admit that it's either time to change. And the other thing is, you're in a great location for startups and so forth. And part of Underscore's value is that there's a network of people to leverage. Don't be too proud to ask for help, right? That's an important part of this, right? There's lots of people that have tried these things in different ways. Pick their brains as much as you can.
Kendall.
When people love your innovation, whether it's your business model, your product, whatever, they will throw money at you. And so if it feels like an uphill battle and you cannot figure out the right pricing to get people to buy, you have a deeper problem.
Okay, so thank you. A slight variation for other two panelists because you're in kind of different world. Where's the one thing you wish your customers or your portfolio companies had listened to you when you told them this is what they should think about with pricing that they didn't listen to? Let's go with Jimmy first.
Focus. I think when you're venture backed, it becomes all about the scoreboard and the numbers, and it's easy to get distracted. Not all sales are equal. Understand your mission, your purpose, test it, retest it, remediate variances, but stay focused. Don't just try to do everything and be everything to all people. Just get success, build a company a product that can underwrite your growth, but stay focused.
Excellent. Peter?
Yeah, the people on this panel are significantly smarter than me, so I would take everything that they said totally at face value. I mean, like Kendall mentioned a moment ago, if your pricing isn't working, you have a deeper problem. She's totally right. I think a lot of folks look at, hey, my conversion's wrong, let me just tweak my pricing, or I'm not getting the customers I want to tweak my pricing. It may not be the pricing, it may be how you're packaging it. It may be that the product kind of stinks, or it may be that you're targeting a bad persona. And I think that that's often overlooked, and that's a great point. And then to Jimmy's point, it's, everybody on this call are entrepreneurs, executives, operators. There's a zillion things and fires to put out every day. Try to focus as much as you can on one or two of those. Pricing certainly should be one of them, and then just innovate over time. And it's a game of inches, so don't feel like you have to solve everything right at once.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I want to just say to everybody who's been listening, I owe you a deep and sincere apology. In this 1 hour, we've demonstrated with these panelists how worthless your other 23 hours today have been, because you've got some great knowledge from some of the smartest people I know. Thank you so very much to all of the panelists. And I think in the chat box, it has all of the information. Send us additional questions afterward. We'll do what we can. I'll turn it back over to Christine, again, with my apologies that your other 23 hours aren't, nearly as good.